Hello, I'm Calvin Dial from Studio Great. Today I'm going to be talking about perception and branding. I want to look at the link between how humans perceive other human beings and how we also perceive branding. When I'm discussing branding with a client, I have a series of ways of describing it. Branding is how people feel about your business. Branding is how you connect with your target audience. Branding speaks to your customers' dreams and desires. Branding is what differentiates you from your competitors. And Marty Neymar describes branding as a person's gut feeling about a business. Now, I believe that all of this is true, but why is it true? Okay, so I do find myself saying things that I know are true, but if someone says, could you explain that? I have a bit of a problem explaining it. So what I want to do is go and deep dive in to find out the reasons why. And I said we should do a video series on this so you can join us on the discovery of the whole thing. So I believe that a brand is very similar to a person. So the way we feel about a brand is the same as the way we feel about a person. Certain things a person does. Think about how you make friends. You know, you might walk into a room of people, you look around, some of them don't look like they're your kind of people, some do look like they're your kind of people. You go and talk to the people who look like you'd get along with them, and you find out some of them you get along with, some of them you don't. But then we have shared, ideas with some people. We've shared likes. We find out we realize we're very similar to certain people, and we become friends with them then. And they're valuable to us. They'll offer us something, we'll offer them something, and that's how we make friends. A brand is very similar as well to that. Branding is perception. It is how people perceive a business, much like how we perceive another person. Okay, person perception is a mental process humans use to help us judge others effectively. We form an impression about a person and then we judge them accordingly, and we do it really quickly. So although we're pretty good at it, we're not totally aware of the mental process, so it's mostly unconscious. So sometimes when you judge something correctly, or you get a good feeling about something, and someone says to you, how did you know? And you say, well, it's just a feeling, or I just guessed, really. Well, it's not actually a guess, it's a mental process that's happening unconsciously to you, right? And that's built into your brain. It's an instinct. We use it to perceive people, but what we're looking at here is we also use the same process to perceive brands. Follow me with that one. If you believe me, this is the whole idea behind it, right? It's a little journey. So this is a similar process to judging a business, okay? We often instantly know when we like or don't like a business, but we have trouble articulating why, okay? So you might be just like, I don't really like that business. I just don't like it, or I don't like that company, I don't like that shop, I don't like that restaurant. And then if someone asks you why, you just go, I just don't. I don't know why. But you've used people perception, or brand perception as you might call it, to judge it, and you don't like it, and it's happened unconsciously, so you're not really sure why, right? But the why feeling that we're talking about here is what a brand is. Okay, that's what a brand is, that why feeling, right? But even some of the best brand experts around the world have trouble articulating this, okay? The problem we face now is that if we can't articulate, how can we create it? So if we don't know the process, if we can't articulate what that feeling is, or if we don't know where that comes from, if we're still saying it's just a feeling or we're just guessing it, how can we create it for other companies, or how can we create it to use it in our advantage? And that's what we want to learn here, because the more we know about the process that people use to judge brands, the more we'll be able to dictate and influence how people feel about them, or influence people's perceptions. So think about how often you do this every day. When you meet someone new, you immediately form an impression of this person. When you order a coffee in a cafe, you may draw a conclusion about the person serving you, even though you know very little about them. Okay, this happened to me today. I was outside having a coffee. Some guy sat down near me, smoking a cigarette, and I immediately formed an impression about the type of person he was, his interests, his likes, who he'd hang around with, where he'd hang out, and I don't know anything about him. Just totally by looking at him, I did all of this instantly in a split second. I wasn't in control of it. My brain just did it. Okay. So if you think about how many times you do that a day, just by looking at someone, you form all these impressions about them. Okay. This ability allows us to make snap judgments and decisions within a matter of seconds. We use the same mental process to judge a business that we do to judge a person. This is essentially what people mean when they say branding is how people feel about your business. So when people say branding is how people feel about your business, it's people's perception of your business. I believe that if we understand different variables that affect this mental process, we'll be able to build better brands. This will greatly increase our ability to influence how people perceive a business. So how do we form these impressions? Everyone will form a different perception of a person. There are a variety of different variables that influence the impressions we form. Factors include characteristics of the person being observed, the context of the situation, your own personal traits, and your past experiences. So these are all the different factors that we must take into account when we think of someone judging your brand or your business. These variables are similar to how a person forms an impression of a business. When people explain branding, they often leave out how people form the feeling they have about a business. When you leave out the mental process and the variables that affect the person's impression, you minimize the complexity of branding. This is probably the reason many brands fail to succeed. People form impressions of others very quickly with minimal information. We base our impressions on social norms we expect from people. For example, you might form an impression of a solicitor on how you expect a solicitor to act. Okay? So I know that sounds kind of weird or simplified, but if we start thinking about it, you do that unconsciously. You expect different people to act a different way and different businesses to act a different way, or a certain way. Visual impressions also play an important role. If you see a person wearing a suit, you would probably assume that they work in an office or a bank. Yeah? This is how we categorize people. And we do the same with businesses. We categorize them. Think of when you're in a foreign country and you can't speak the language. Thanks to visual cues, you can find a bank, a restaurant, and a grocery store because of how they look. A bank will look the way we expect a bank to look. A restaurant will look the way we expect a restaurant to look. And a grocery store will look the way we expect the grocery store to look. If they do not look like that, then how will we know what they are? Okay, we have to work harder to figure out what they are. This is an often overlooked area of brand research. How do the people who represent your brand act? How they behave, their behavior, both verbal and non-verbal, will directly affect a person's perception of your business. Social categorization. One of the mental shortcuts we use in person perception is social categorization. In this process, we mentally categorize different groups of people on based on common characteristics. Sometimes the process happens consciously, but for most part, social categorization happens automatically and unconsciously. Okay, so we don't control it, it just happens. Some of the most common categories are age, gender, occupation, and race. One of the problems with social categorization is it can lead to prejudice and discrimination and, stereotyping people as well. So social categorization allows you to make rapid judgments. Realistically, you do not have enough time to get to know every person you meet. Using social categorization allows you to make decisions and establish expectations on how people will behave quickly, allowing you to focus on other things. Okay, so your brain does it because you're like, I'm not getting to know everyone, so I just look, I kind of met a person like that before, they'll act like that, that's the way it works. It does it quickly for you so that you can focus on things that are more important to you. Okay, this is also part of the branding process. We socially categorize businesses all the time. Some of the most common categories are value, price, industry, and quality. Think how many times a day you do this. You see a piece of marketing from a business and you instantly form an impression of what industry it's in, how expensive it is and how valuable it may be, and you do this all by just looking at it and reading maybe one or two words. But for the most part you can do it by just looking at it. So that's all branding. That's branding, and that's how important branding is, because it could be the make or break whether this person categorizes it as useful for them or not useful. An example of social categorization is, imagine you're getting on a bus and there are only 2 seats available. One is next to a petite elderly woman, the other is next to a burly, grim-faced man. Based on your immediate impression, you sit next to the elderly woman, who unfortunately turns out to be quite skilled at pickpocketing. But because of social categorization, you immediately judge the woman as harmless and the man as threatening, leading to the loss of your wallet. While social categorization can be useful at times, it can also lead to these kinds of misjudgments. But you can agree that most people would probably do the same thing there. So it's all down to perception again. Unfortunately, this happens with businesses too. A business can often convince a customer that they're better than their competitors when this may not be the case. However, once the customer realizes the business is not what they expected, they will have a negative perception of that business, right? So never try to fool anyone or lie about anything, because once they find out, that's you done. Your gut feeling's gone. Perception, bad perception, right? People talk and the word spreads. It's bad for business, bad for your brand, and your brand is people's perception of you, and it's the most powerful thing to your business succeeding is people's perception, which means that branding is the most powerful thing to your business as well. So you have to look into this. You have to look into how people feel about your business and how you can influence how they feel about your business. So when you're building a good brand, the product or the service you provide must be excellent, right? That's number one thing, because if they use whatever your business is and it's not good, that's going to give a terrible perception. So that's number one. So this is the core of people's perception of your business. If people feel like your business was valuable to them, they will recommend you to others. If it was not a good experience, they will warn others away, which you do not want, which is bad. Because of the way the human mind works, some very good businesses with no brand don't attract as many customers as mediocre businesses with good brands, and this is all down to perception. If people don't instantly get a good impression of your business, you may lose their attention entirely. This happens all the time. I always see it happening. The business is excellent, but people don't know. They don't know it's excellent because they don't get that off the way it looks, the way it acts. Sometimes it might be just non-existent. People don't even know it's there, which is bad branding and bad marketing as well, right? So what you can do to work on this is use what we're talking about here, how people perceive things, how they perceive other people, and how they perceive businesses, how they perceive brands, and we'll use that in our advantage to start building a better brand and start influencing how people feel about our business. Okay, so how do we use all of this to help us with our brand? Well, we know how people perceive other people, okay? It's a mental process called person perception, and we know the different variables now that affect this. So we can now use these variables to influence how people feel about our brand, okay, or how people perceive our brand. How do we do this? Well, we have to know who the person is that we're trying to influence, and this is why it's so important to know your target audience or your target customer, because the more we know about them, the more we can influence their perception of us using these variables, and that's how it'll help us create a better brand. So now we know what the feeling is, where the feeling comes from. So what we'll have to go do is in the next video, let's go a bit deeper and see how do we influence this, and like how do we know what people like, and why do people like what they like, why do people like anything, or why do they choose anything, or what makes people like stuff. Let's go and look deeper into that, and deeper into how we can influence their perception of our brand. Thank you for watching another Studio Great video. If you would like to hire us, please go to our website www.studiogreat.eu.